Hello and welcome back to part 2 of our tutorial. In this video I will show you how to do the last round, the bind off round, and shape the points of the snowflake. We have two types of points here. The first one that I call a tree point because it reminds me of a little tree, and the other one is what I called an arrow point, because for some reason it just reminds me of little arrows. Well, anyway, I think we're ready to start, and at this point our snowflake looks like this. All of our stitches are on our circular needle, and I moved some of the stitches towards the front of the needle so it's easier to knit, and we're ready to start. So to begin with, we are going to knit into the first stitch on our left hand needle, and using the knitted cast on method we are going to cast on 6 stitches. So knitting into the first stitch, and without slipping that stitch off the needle, we're knitting 1 stitch through and then placing it onto our left hand needle. Next, knitting into the newly made stitch, we are producing a new stitch, and once again placing it onto our left hand needle. That's 2 stitches made. We're going to continue this way and make a third one. That's 3. Once again, 4, 5, and 6. So we've cast it on, or we cast on the number of stitches we need, and it's 6. And next we are going to bind off 4 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you previously watched my videos, and especially the lettered snowflake pattern, you will be very familiar with this section, because that's exactly the same kind of point I have on 2 of my other designs. But if this is your first video, then this may be, you may be new to it. Well, anyway, so we just bound off 4 stitches, and we placed the last stitch back to the left hand needle. Next, according to the pattern, we are going to cast on 4 stitches. So once again, knitting into this same stitch on the left hand needle, and without slipping it off our needle, we are making a new stitch and placing it back to the left hand needle. That's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Once again, the last stitch goes back to the left hand needle, and this time we are going to bind off 3 stitches. 1, 2, 3, placing the stitch back to the left hand needle, and once again, without slipping that stitch of the left hand needle, casting on 3 more stitches. 1, 2, and 3. And on the way back we're going to bind off 2 stitches this time. 1, 2. So we finished one side of our little tree, and now we're gonna make the top of the tree, and it will consist of 4 cast on stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, and on the way back we're going to bind off 4 stitches as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117, 118, 119, 120, 121, 122, 123, once again, returning the stitch back to the left hand needle. Always bring the last stitch back to your left hand needle, and this time we are going to cast on 2 stitches, 1, 2, and this time we're going to bind off 3 stitches. Going down, we're binding off 1 more stitch, 2, 1 more than what we cast on, 3. Now returning the stitch back to the left hand needle, and this time we're casting on 3 stitches, 1, 2, 3, and this time we are going to bind off 4 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, and on our last tree branch that we're making here, we're going to cast on 4 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, and the last bind off is going to be 11 stitches. So we're going to bind off 11 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Placing the stitch back to the left hand needle. Here we completed our first point that looks like a little tree, and now we are ready to make our second point that looks like little arrows to me. To make that one, we're going to begin by casting on 7 stitches. I'm actually going to use my double pointed needles because this using the circular needle as a cord is kind of driving me nuts here, so I think it's going to be a little easier if I just use my double point needle, but you can use whatever is more comfortable for you. So I'm casting on 7 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Placing the stitch back to the left hand needle. It always goes back to the left hand needle, and binding off 2 stitches, 1, 2, placing the stitch back, this time casting on 2 stitches, 1, 2, placing it back and binding off 2, 1, 2, repeating it one more time, casting on 2 stitches, 1, 2, and this time we are going to bind off 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Once again, the stitch goes back to the left hand needle. Here's our first little arrow, and Okay, let me consult my notes because I forgot. Okay, so after this we need to cast on 4. You don't really need to memorize this because you can just follow the pattern. It gives you exact numbers every time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, but you will find out that after knitting it 6 times you will remember the count. Okay, casting off 2, 1, 2. Once again, casting on 2 more, 1, 2, binding off 2, 1, 2, placing it back, casting on 2 more, 1, 2, and once again binding off 4 this time, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we have 2 of our little arrows. There's 1, this is 2, and now we're going to knit the third one, and we're going to begin by casting on 4 stitches again. 1, 2, 3, 4, binding of 2, 1, 2, now casting on 2 again, 1, 2, binding of 2, 1, 2, one last time casting on 2 stitches, 1, 2, and this is going to be our last bind off on this repeat, and this time you're going to bind off 12 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4. I have some bugs crawling on me. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And now we have completed the first repeat. So we have our tree looking point and our arrows looking point already, and you have to repeat this process 5 more times, and when you do so, following the notes, so you don't have to remember, just follow the notes, complete this sequence 5 more times, and at the end this is what you're going to have. So you will have 6 points that look like little trees and 6 points that look like arrows. One thing I need to mention to you is on your last bind off, when you're going to bind off, you will only bind off 11 stitches, and your 12th stitch is going to be the last one left on the needle. And the way to bind off this last stitch is as follows. So what we are going to do is we are going to insert our needle into the very first stitch that we knitted into. You see, it's this one, and our first tree grows out of that stitch. So we're going to insert the needle in that stitch one more time, pull a new stitch through. So once again, So insert into the stitch, pull a new stitch through, and now slip this stitch from right hand needle over this new stitch, tighten it up a little bit. At this point, trim your yarn, cut it off from your skein, and pull the end through the loop and tighten your last stitch. What I recommend you do next is using a tapestry needle. I would it would be a part of your weaving in the ends, so when you weave in the ends, kind of like tighten and sew up this end on the other side. This will minimize the holes that kind of always appear, but by using the tapestry needle and binding off and weaving in the end, you can tighten it and make it look much nicer. And trim any ends after binding off the yarn, not binding off, but weaving in the ends, trim in the ends. And now your snowflake is ready for blocking. And here I have one here that I knitted previously, and I already blocked it on my blocking mat. I prefer to block out every single point because that's what really makes your snowflake look the best. And then use any stiffener that you prefer to stiffen your snowflake, and at the end you're going to have a nice beautiful snowflake like that. Well, without the little beads that I have here, but I'll save that for the next time to show you how I place beads on my snowflakes. But that's all for today from me, and I hope you enjoyed it and have fun making snowflakes. Bye.